Right, welcome everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Zhao today, who is an assistant professor of ecosystem services, artificial intelligence, and also one of our affiliate faculty members for all of you grad students looking for another committee member. And I am extra excited to introduce her today because both she and I graduated from the same university, the University of Iowa, and we share a committee member who is on both of our committees. So she received her PhD in geography from the University of Iowa in 2018, where her focus was on quantifying and mapping supply and demand in urban ecosystem services. And after graduating with her PhD, she worked as a research methodologist in spatial data science at NORC at the University of Chicago. And then also, like me, moved way farther south to the warm weather and works here now in agronomy, which is over in McCarty Hall. And her research interests include GIS, remote sensing, geovisualization, ecosystem service assessments, and AI using a lot of machine learning, and has just a plethora of things that your research has covered in the last few years alone. So she's going to be telling us about her work to construct AI-ready geospatial data sets to quantify and map ecosystem components. So join me in welcoming Dr. Zhao.
So thanks for the introduction. So today my talk is geospatial and artificial intelligence for ecosystem service assessments. So I first want to just give a very brief introduction. So I originally come from China, and I studied in Wuhan University for my bachelor degree in geodesy and geomatics. And later on, I started in Iowa and got a PhD in geography. I worked for 4 years at NORC at the University of Chicago, which is a social science institute. I work with a lot of research projects in public health and like the intersection of social science and geography. Then this year, January, I joined the US in the agronomy department. So my PhD work is mostly around urban ecosystem services. So I use this framework, like I look into both the supply and demand side, like how the biophysical environment provide ecosystem services and how the societal like demands for such services. And so using like spatially explicit approaches, for example, like I look into the impacts of the spatial scale and also landscape heterogeneity, spatial autocorrelation, like all of those like spatial thinking and principles in mapping ecosystem services. So I really want to understand the accuracy of the mapping, like what's the error and what's the accuracy, can we improve that? So, and then later I work in NORC, so I'm kind of working everywhere. So I work in like survey methodology because I'm interested in like some social science aspects, like those methods to understand societal demands for services. Usually there are like surveys, questionnaires along those lines. So I would like to gain those knowledge. And then I continue to work some geospatial like models and analysis. And one area that I'm pretty interested in is like the using social sensing, like the environmental sensors, to look into the effects of environmental exposure on human health. So I also have a project that works on WebGIS. So like I develop WebGIS tools for governments and nonprofits. And then a big chunk of my projects at NORC is about machine learning and deep learning. So I started to use like big data classifiers to find populations that have some certain characteristics so that the organization can target those populations for survey projects. And then we also look at like image classification and object detection techniques applied on like those crowdsourced images to identify information such as like the price tag, the brands in the image to inform like public health surveillance. So there's just a mix of projects and skill sets I have. And then this is how I come to the UF agronomy department, because they are looking at someone who has some background of geospatial analysis and then interested in AI applications, but also have some research research experience grounded in physical environment. For example, look at the natural resources and agricultural management area. So I would feel like this position is very multidisciplinary because it heavily emphasizes the technology, but also want to use those technology to advance our understanding of the values of nature. Basically, the values of the natural assets in urban systems, in rural systems, in different types of landscapes, and how we can develop methods to quantify the value. And so I'm now an agronomy, and then I also have an affiliation in geography and School of Natural Resources and Environment. Yeah. So next is this is the framework. Like that, I'll try to draw something like the diagram to show my thinking, like how I want to build my lab. So basically, in the future, I want to leverage all the different types of geospatial data sources, including remote sensing, sensors, social media, and crowdsourced information, and then leverage those machine learning and AI techniques to quantify the biophysical supply of ecosystem, but also the social demand for ecosystem services. And this includes like carbon storage and sequestration, pollination services, biodiversity, and including like wildlife watching, landscape aesthetics, those cultural, more intangible benefits. And then also services related to the soil, for example, water filtration, and then like the water supply and quantity. So this is the some students working with me in my first year. So they are from two students are from ECE, so they have some engineering backgrounds because they know AI very well. And then there's also computer scientists, students from computer science who work with me about like landscape modeling and web GIS. So today's talk, I'm gonna briefly go over the concept of ecosystem services and why spatial modeling is important, and what are some current gaps, and how AI and remote sensing can help us. So this is the classification that people usually talk about ecosystem services, defined by Millennium Ecosystem Assessments in 2005. So it includes provisioning services, so think the goods products produced by agriculture. You can think about like the wood, timber from timberland, or like those croplands, so like any corn, soybean, and those products, and also energy and fiber. So then regulating services is more like how the environment regulates air, water. So something like water filtration and carbon sequestration are regulating services. And cultural is more intangible, so related to the kinesthetic, spiritual experience. And lastly, there are supporting services that such as like habitat provision and nutrient cycling that supports the provision of all the other services. So this is the big classification. And the motivation is that in Costanza, which is a big name in the field, like he's an ecological economist, and he quantified ecosystem services across the globe and estimate that there is an average of 33 trillion per year dollar for the total ecosystem services in the entire biosphere, and so it's way more than the global national product total. And he also had a second study to look into the reduction of services value due to the change of land use, and found that there are just like 4 to 20 trillion dollar loss per year because of land degradation and land cover change. So it is very important that we quantify these values, and through natural capital accounting and through valuation of ecosystem services. However, I want to also emphasize that the value of these services changes across space. So there's spatial like variability, non-stationarity involved in the quantification. So in an early paper we did is like we look into urban green and space blue space, and then we want to quantify the value, dollar value for that. And so because urban green and blue provide benefits such as shading and aesthetic quality and all kinds of services, how can we have an estimate of the dollar value for that, for this kind of more like intangible benefits? So a popular method is called hedonic price modeling, that we use basically a regression model to estimate the marginal implicit price of a variety of environmental assets, such as including like those neighborhood attributes and environmental attributes. So we apply like a global model, like regression model that's like have global coefficients estimates, and then we also apply the geographic weighted regression to look at the changes of the value. So this diagram picture shows that there are like, so these are like values of parks, values of trails and lakes. They actually are like closer to these features would then increase the housing price. So, but then also we see some variations here and there, like because the color is different, we indicate that in this area, actually the value of the parks, trails, and lakes are not so much, and even negatively impacted housing price. So what I want to emphasize here is just like, regardless of which buffers we choose, like distance to within which we have those environmental amenities, regardless of the buffer size, tree cover always provide positive neighborhood externality. Meaning that tree cover has high value in the housing market. So, and then this is the conclusion is that we need to look into the landscape context when evaluating ecosystem services, and the global value may lead to like some like underestimation or overestimation, and so it could fail to meet the needs of and the desires of the local residents. So as I said, evaluation is locally specific, and there's also spatial heterogeneity in ecosystems' capacity to provide benefits. Benefits also change over time. So I really like this cascade model in quantifying ecosystem services, and this is modified from the TEEB, which is a global initiative that use like emphasize economic evaluation of biodiversity and services. And this, like Cox mentioned, this is like a fundamental literature that people always like look at. So usually like we will think about like the ecosystem structure and natural capitals assets such as trees, water, and those like biophysical units as the starting point. And then this is gonna link to the functions and processes this like capital provides. And then it cascades down to ecosystem supply. Like ecosystem supply cannot become benefits if there is no use or desires or needs. So there's an interaction between like the use, the people, and the provisioning. So then once it becomes benefits and it holds some economic or non-monetary values, for example, intrinsic values, non-marketing values, and this all depends on people's preference and perceptions, because different people views like the services differently. And then this is gonna also translate to like what's the actual use, needs, and desires, and then leads to like policy and decision making on the ground. So like if you think about landowners, they may, based on their perceptions towards ecosystem services, based on the amount of supply, and they may have different decision making in terms of how they manage their agricultural lands, how they manage their timberland, for example, and then it could cause like changes in the land use and land cover, changes in the intensity of land management, and there are also global change drivers such as climate change and other external factors, and they are all going to impact the supply, like the original of ecosystem service delivery. So it's like a feedback loop. So I I usually like will think about like how we can, if we want to quantify services, then we need to look at how we can better quantify the structures, the biophysical components, and then how we can model the processes and functions, and then this can translate it to transform to the final services. So, however, this is a pretty young field, and most of the approaches are expert-based, meaning that we don't have so much understanding of the links between different dots in that diagram. So people usually would just link the supply to the land use and land cover and assign some expert values like a relative scale to indicate the capacity of each land cover and land use type for the supply, for example. So it is like a simple, but then also like a approach that can be rapidly applied to any areas. So some like the second category is about like empirical approaches. So people like observe some have observations of actual services on the ground and then try to develop spatial models and statistical empirical models to extrapolate the observations across the space, for example. So like using regression models or ecological models. And then the INVEST model, which is a model developed by Stanford University, the National Capital Project is a very famous model for that use like ecological production functions and process-based models to quantify ecosystem services. And it has a hierarchy of approaches, including those land use and land cover-based approaches, but also some like regression approaches, more biophysical driven models as well. So I won't go into that detail, but I want to emphasize that it depends on like what is your goal for the assessment. If you are just, do you need any process understanding? If yes, then you may want to consider those like more complex biophysical driven models. But if you don't need the process understanding and you just want to know what's the total amount of value in my land, for example, and then this probably you want to just have a rough estimate and a rough overview, then the land cover based approaches is the option. But if you want you don't want to have process understanding, but you do want to more explicit measures as opposed to just a global aggregate value, then you may want to consider the middle ground, which is like those more empirical models, like based on causal relationships, extrapolation of your primary observations, for example. So I highlight here, this is the most popular way to quantify ecosystem services, which is a lookup table approach. So we call it ecosystem service matrix. And here we have basically this land cover of a very granular, detailed land cover map, showing all the different types of land use and land cover, and then it could be converted to an ecosystem service map based on a lookup table that we link each land cover types with all the different types of ecosystem services, and this is based on an aggregation of experts' opinions. For example, this is at a relative scale. For example, 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, and so you assign these values, and then you just do some like matrix multiplication, and then figure out the math to get the value. For example, this is a tier 1 approach. So I think we people usually use this type of approach because there's not so many data, primary data, observations, for example. So and then it could even usually assessments of ecosystem services are conducted in smaller scale in certain geography as opposed to once you build a model, it cannot be easily transferred to other areas, for example. So and also there's less investigation about the nonlinear relationships when we build predictive models in the earlier stage. So we usually use linear regression and linear approaches as opposed to not capture the nonlinear dynamics. Lastly, I want to say like most of the studies focus on the provision, the supply, but less focus on the social demand. And then so we did some assessments about comparing the simple approach with the more complex approach. So it's a tier 1 versus tier 3 approach. So in this case, we are looking at the carbon storage and sequestration, carbon storage in urban areas. So this is a map showing the Iowa city. So we have some field observations of tree like structure, crown width, DBH, and height. And then we did the first approach is more complex. So we use LiDAR to quantify the dimension of the tree, and then use those metrics to feed into an allometric model to calculate biomass, and then convert that to carbon storage. So, and the second approach is simple. We use the invest carbon storage model, which is based on the tier 1 land use and land cover base. So just use a high resolution land cover map and use some predefined values, like tons of carbon per hectare, for example, from the literature, and then we then calculate the amount of carbon by land use. And then we did a validation study. So we look at that actually. So this both approach actually can has a high linear relationship with the observation, but we do see that this second approach do not have such high correlation compared to the more complex approach. And these are like the first column is the observation, like all of the approaches actually underestimate carbon storage, and the land use and land cover based approaches it's the least accurate model, because it's like half of the carbon will not captured by that method. So in study area-wide comparison, we found that both approaches give us similar values. For example, they estimated that about 110,000 tons of carbon are stored by urban trees in Iowa City. So these values are very similar across the models. However, when we look at the spatial variability and also the correlation at the pixel level, so we do find that there are like discrepancies, and the discrepancy between the methods also change based on which resolution we are looking at. If we compare the two methods at the 1 meter resolution, the discrepancy is smaller. But if we just produce estimate those maps at the 30 meter, which is the coarser resolution, then those discrepancies start to become larger. So we also found that if we use a higher resolution, so it's 1 meter resolution land use and land cover map, it can be closer, like the estimates can increase, the accuracy can improve. So that's the conclusion, is like we found like a similar citywide estimates. However, the ecosystem structure-based approaches provide more accurate estimates. And if we don't have that information, we cannot fit a complex model, then a simple model also works, as long as we give a higher resolution land use and land cover map as the input. So the suggestion is that we should depends on your, like, if we want to have some explicit assessments, then we want to use actually quantify the biophysical structures that underpins the services. So another study we found, it's like also related to land use and land cover, is we model the pollination services. And I want to emphasize that here is just like not only the spatial resolution matters, but also the thematic resolution. Because if you think about the bees, and they are moving around, they are like mobile animals. So the landscape structure and the configuration and also the composition, all of those landscape features are important in the estimation of pollination. So what we are doing here is just to improve the land use and land cover map with habitat quality assessment. So we improve basically adding more categories of land use that represents the habitat resources for bees. In this case, it's the flower resources and also the nesting resources. So we found that local land management practices could alter this habitat resources, and we need to have a way to capture those variability and heterogeneity in urban areas in order to quantify pollination. And this is the way we did is to look at like relative plant size richness, and we did a survey and like just developed a quantitative model to predict the flower resources. And then we look at the final pollination estimate, and we found that if we have a finer thematic resolution, land use and land cover based map, then if like this is gonna increase our like accuracy in terms of mapping pollination, because we have compared to like the observation, we can see there is a higher linear correlation here. So now I'm gonna move to the next chapter is about GeoAI. So how GeoAI can help us here. Because like I talk about like the data scarcity, the lack of primary data, that's why people use land use and land cover based approaches. And then so nowadays we have a lot of ecologically and socially relevant data, big data. So now so AI can ingest those data and then could create potentially rapid assessments and repeatable assessments of ecosystem services. And also AI can, like those machine learning models usually deal with non-linearity. So it could potentially improve the accuracy as we want to do data mining among like tons of features. And then also lastly, because like AI can analyze unstructured data, and usually unstructured data, I mean like images, text, messages. So those data are usually produced by like volunteers and it's like volunteer geographic information. So AI can process those unstructured data, and then this is like very like it reflects how people interact with the environment, because usually when they submit those information, they have a direct interaction with the environment outside. So it could capture those social aspects in terms of the use of the services. So I envision that there are two pathways for AI. But I'm really interested in how you think about how AI can improve the ecosystem service assessment. This is just my like initial thoughts. So if you think about like I just mentioned about the cascade model. So we have ecological indicators and metrics that measures components and structures in the ecosystem, and then we have some tiered approach by physical models. Some are very simple, the cap table, land use, land cover based, and then the middle is like a regression, causal relationship, and the last one is like a very complex biophysical model. So this is the typical biophysical models we use. And then finally, we can quantify a whole bunch of services. But then how AI can help us is, firstly, AI can help us extract, to do feature extraction. So that means like we can develop, we can better develop like ecological indicators and metrics. And so it helps us to quantify the components, the structures, which is kind of the top layer of that cascade model. And then the second one is like we can use all this data like remote sensing, VGI, and ground observation with the ecological indicators, and then build a predictive model to directly predict ecosystem services, provided that we have some moderate or large amounts of observations of ecosystem services. So this is very data driven and also like requires tons of data to build the model. So I would say like the future is like we can have AI, like AI help us to like create a solution to rapidly, reproducibly and repeatedly assess ecosystem services. So it means that we want to have an infrastructure that like we can, this is a streamlined process. We have like data from a variety of sources, we integrate the data, and then we have cyber infrastructure and digital resources such as HPC, cloud-based solutions. And then we apply machine learning models and AI deep learning models to extract those information to quantify structures, components in the ecosystem, and then also to predict services directly. And lastly, we can then provide those information to policy and decision maker. So I have two very important data sources I want to describe. One is the remote sensing. Basically, it's the era of Earth observation and remote sensing big data. So my future work involves the use of moderate to high resolution remote sensing images. So particularly Sentinel-2 Planetscope and SkySat at different spatial resolution, so that I can quantify ecosystem services at in remote areas, but also look at the temporal changes, intra-annual changes, for example. So typically, I would think about there are three steps. So remote sensing can provide us a lot of indices to indicate the water, the vegetation, and soil features. And then remote sensing for land use and land cover classification and mapping is a big field, because once we have a more accurate land use and land cover map, then we can easily integrate with existing ecosystem service assessment methods to quantify. And then lastly is we could also use remote sensing images and data to extract those components in the cascade model. So here is just a scale. Some of the products do not apply to it's scale dependent. So depends on which ecological level we are looking at. For example, multispectral remote sensors cannot give us the capability to estimate those vegetation structure, for example. So some of the biophysical traits cannot be estimated by coarser resolution multispectral satellite images. So we need to use LiDAR, for example, or airborne LiDAR, and some in situ sensors like the IoT sensors that we can install in the field. So I want to skip this project because I want to leave some time for us to discuss. So the second data source I will emphasize is volunteered geographic information. The big one is iNaturalist, because it provides us a lot of data on biodiversity and the use of cultural ecosystem services, and social media data, Flickr, also is a popular one, and street view images. So I will just talk about some computer vision algorithms can be used to extract objects and thematic features from the geotagged images. So what I'm thinking about, so in terms of urban green and blue, I would like to use street views to quantify the green space, for example, and habitat resources. Sometimes if you look at the top-down approach using remote sensing, you cannot estimate those very fine-grained habitat resources. And then also the flow and the use of cultural services such as aesthetic appreciation, aesthetic view shed analysis, and this could be this type of street view images can be helpful in that case. And also the use of cultural ecosystem services such as wildlife watching. If we can combine social media Flickr images with computer vision, then we could classify the species in the image, and then to look at fine details about what specific cultural ecosystem services people use in across space and time. So this is so usually I would think about computer vision CNN can be applied to for taxonomic classification, for example, identify birds, species, and bees in the image, and then object detection, scene classification, whether it's a beach or it's a forest, landscape estimation, and then thematic and instance segmentation. For example, we can segment the trees and the clouds from high resolution images to estimate carbon. So this is some basic introduction of artificial neural network. So it's like basically we connect the inputs. The neuron is a weighted sum of the inputs and with an activation function. So the activation function introduced the nonlinearity in this case. And I would, but the basic, like the fully connected layer is not useful, is not efficient for processing images because if we calculate the number of parameters in the neurons to train, then it's like millions of like ways that we have to train. So that's why people use like deep convolution neural networks with convolution operations. And a good thing is like as you like use convolution operations, the images can then be compressed and come deeper with deeper channels. And so this is a typical like AI approaches that I would use in my research for like image processing. So as I mentioned, like I would like to identify objects in the image and seeing classification. And this is a transfer learning approach is viable because like a lot of the computer vision like competitions, they already created a lot of pre-trained models. So why don't we just leverage those pre-trained weights and then just train the model for the last fully connected layer to create a custom model for our own research. So this is I would say like transfer learning is a good approach. And then I would like to work on the pollination services because like nowadays we have so many pollinator pictures from iNaturalist and also all other citizen science projects. Why don't we leverage those images and then apply AI and then we can develop like species distribution model and or using machine learning to predict those like the distribution of pollination, for example. And this is a paper that we did in 2019, and we look at two citizen science, two like crowdsourced images, crowdsourced data actually. So eBird and also Flickr. So we are trying to quantify the bird watching, which is a cultural ecosystem services. And so the idea is that we want to apply this like object detection algorithm on the Flickr images and to sort out the images with bird objects in that, and then to see how the Flickr, because Flickr is a social media data and it has some spatial bias, and usually like urban areas have more submissions of Flickr images compared to say like rural, less populated areas. So we don't know exactly what's the bias there. And then, but we do have a sort of gold standard data sets for bird watching, which is eBird. So eBird is like in the field, like eBird is a golden standard. So we want to compare these two database and see like to see how the spatial patterning would change depends on which data we use. So we look at we apply this YOLO state of art at that time is state of art algorithm for object detection to detect birds, and then we process like 90 million birds images to identify birds using the high performance computing resources in Iowa. And then we found that using object detection, we find 3.8% images with birds in the Flickr images. And then if we just look at the metadata, there's only 2.7%. So there's added values in applying the object detection to identify bird images. And we also found that the YOLO-based detection has higher accuracy compared to those metadata search, like keyword search approaches. So this is the findings. We look at the patterns based on the deep learning approach and the spatial patterns based on the metadata search alone. And then we found some like this is a lot of the areas are underestimated by the keyword search. So And then this is a comparison between the metadata, between the YOLO detection and the eBird. And so eBird gives us more observations, like bird watching, bird watching cases here, like in the New England areas. So we do find that spatial patterns kind of different, but it's yeah, there are a lot of geographic variation here. So I think the future is like we cannot just rely on a single citizen science project or like a single social media data, because it will in order to like capture those like patterns, human activities related to cultural ecosystem services, we need to come up with a way to integrate a variety of like programs and crowdsource information. So the last one, I'll introduce the projects that I'm involved in Florida since I started my position here. So it is a big one, like a big project in between the Department of Agronomy and the ECE departments. So they have a project called the Florida AI Harvest. So we want to. So I don't want to introduce the team members in the project. So we have some AI experts from ECE departments. We also have like agronomy experts that are very familiar with grassland ecology and grazing land management, and also an experts about like water conservation and nutrient cycling. And then I'm the sort of the geographer, like GIS person in the team. And this is a lot of students working on the project. It's a statewide assessment of ecosystem services for agricultural lands. So the question is like, actually there is a strong stakeholder interest in Florida, especially from the producers, the ranchers in Florida. They want to understand the value, the economic value of their working lands. For example, there are some big ranch in the southern Florida. They have huge amounts of land with timbers and grassland for grazing, and so they want to estimate if they can participate in some compensation program or incentive programs, so that they can get money back if they preserve the natural resources on their land. And so there needs to a way to quantify the amount of ecosystem services on the land, but also put a price tag on the land. So this is the motivation of the study. And the question is like, what values do my land have in terms of biophysical values and economic values? So we want to use AI, and the challenge is that we don't have so much ground observations of ecosystem services to train a big AI model. So the approach is like sort of the same as I sketched previously. It's like the data route is we just have tons of observations and we create a predictive model. And the second is like a small data set that we can gather. For example, we use those small data of ground observations just for validation, but not for the training of the model. So, and this involves ecological information such as those like inverse models or like existing ecological models. We should leverage those in order to estimate ecosystem services. So there are two ways that we can approach the problem. And for now, we just want to integrate open data and existing like observations of ecosystem services into a large geodatabase. So this involves like the integration of remote sensing data. So we have now access to high res like 3 meter and 50 centimeter resolution remote sensing images, and then we also compile a whole list of like public GIS data such as terrain, soil attributes, and land use. And then we gather citizen science and social media data related to biodiversity. For example, the iNaturalist data, and also there are like the Flickr data. And then the fieldwork and ground observation, we actually reach out to many research groups in Florida to ask for if they have any ground observations of plants plant incidents, so that we can combine all of the existing research data along with the global data sets. Like I'll show you later about the data sources. So now we are just cleaning those data and try to put them into a database so that we can train the AI model later. So our first focus is the biodiversity. Like, can we quantify biodiversity in Florida? So these are the public and the private biodiversity data sources that we have now. But I would say like most of the majority are from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the GBIF. And then we also have some like local projects, like statewide projects, and create those inventories. And then the second part is in the same time we are also collecting soil samples across the state of Florida rangeland. Rangeland. So we want to stack all the different types of ecosystem services on top of each other. So the first layer is biodiversity, soil carbon, and then maybe water filtration, and then so it's like a variety of ecosystem services. So this is the second branch of the project, is to look at the potential of livestock systems for carbon storage and sequestration to offset greenhouse gas emission. So we have several, like it's about like 20 farms across Florida, and we try to sample soil and dig holes and quantify the carbon storage in the soil. And this the equipment that we use is a very efficient equipment that we can dig into the depth, like under the surface about like 60 centimeter. So this is what we are doing now. Like we're trying to have more and more points so that we can create that like maps of carbon storage. So the next step is to actually leverage those data to develop deep learning models, because we now have remote sensing, ground observation, and then those like open GIS data. So we want to build those into a deep learning model to predict biodiversity and soil carbon storage. And then also based on my background, I want to pursue the biomass carbon as well, and also pollination. So all of those can stack together to create a comprehensive picture of the ecosystem services in Florida. So I'm looking into like to connect with other researchers if you are interested in like collaborating on this project, so we can like build a larger database for ecosystem service quantification in the state. There are just a lot of push and like I would say like a motivation from the stakeholder perspective, like the stakeholders, those like producers and farmers. We have few days with them and few trips together, and they are really welcome us to go to their land to collect samples. For example, they really want to have some kind of market mechanism, a market for like ecosystem services, so that they can show the value of their land. And so yeah, this is my talk today. So thank you.